Good morning, friends. Good to see everybody. I'm Chris Barris, lead minister here, and before we get started to our message today, I wanted to introduce you to Louis Glasgow. Louis works for an organization called Community in Schools, and they're a group that we just started doing things with this year. They've been around a while. Louis has been working there, you said 8 years, right? 8 years. I wanted you to hear a little bit about them and what they do. So Louis, just start out. Tell us, what is Communities in Schools all about? I feel like it's in the title, but can you elaborate on it a little bit for us?
Yeah, no problem. First of all, thank you everybody for having me this morning. I work for Communities in Schools of Richmond. We are the local affiliate of a national nonprofit with over 200 affiliates around the country. We are essentially a retention program that works to keep kids in school and surround them with a community of support to help them succeed in school and achieve in life. We have full-time staff that are placed at 41 schools in the area, including Richmond Public Schools and Henrico County. And those site coordinators that we call them, they provide integrated supports and case management for their students, as well as help coordinate community efforts and work with volunteers.
So volunteers like people from a church or different organizations that would want to get involved, whether it's tutoring or whatever, they're going to go through an organization like yours to be able to work in the schools. That's basically how it works?
Absolutely. So our site coordinators are there to help you establish a schedule, help match you to students that would benefit most from your support, and also help troubleshoot and manage just daily interactions.
Okay, that's a huge undertaking because of the school system's massive, a lot of kids. I'm sure you have a lot of organization in the background that makes that work. Can you tell us just a story of where you've seen it, this is what we do, this is why we do what we do, this is where it works?
Yeah, so I'm gonna speak about one of my personal students. He tells his story beautifully, so if you are interested, you can check out our YouTube. He was a Moving On winner, which is an award that we do he won this year. But his name is Shaquille, and I first got him when he was in first grade. He had been homeschooled for preschool and kindergarten. And so he came to us in public school after the pandemic and schools had reopened. And he was kind of first put on my radar because he was always crying. He was having a really hard time adjusting to public school and being away from his mom. And so we connected with his mom and were able to get him enrolled in our program. And through a variety of supports, including supportive guidance from myself, we placed him in a small group, a student group, to help with his social emotional learning and building relationships with his peers and working on his confidence. And then we also paired him with a volunteer reading buddy. When he first came to us, he was below grade level, and by the end of the school year, he was actually reading above his grade level. So just the impact that volunteer had on his literacy that year was phenomenal. And so by the end of the school year, he was thriving, and he went from just this scared little boy that was scared to get on the school bus and be away from mom to, just the highlight of everybody's day in the building.
To be fair, school buses are very scary.
They
so
are.
That I think that's totally reasonable. For a church like ours, you and I were talking before, you said probably over 50% of your volunteers come from faith communities of some sort. What would it look like for us? Or how can we partner with you going forward? We've done one project earlier this year. We have it also scheduled to come up on August 17th. But what does partnering with you look like?
Yeah, so we have a lot of different ways to get engaged. At the end of service, I'll be at the back table with just some literature about who we are and ways to get involved. We have a variety of volunteer opportunities from what we call Done in a Day, which would be your one-time volunteer events. Think events like Field Day, Harvest Festivals, Read Across America. But for those of you that have the flexibility in your schedule, we also have recurring volunteer opportunities. So those mentors and reading buddies, volunteers like, Shaquille's reading buddy that are able to come in and work with a student once a week and really make that lasting impact and create a caring one-on-one relationship. And then absolutely opportunities like assembling kits. We have a variety of different kits that we collect throughout the year.
Awesome. So we're going to be involved. Some of you have already signed up for our meal packing event for Fox Elementary on August 17th. We're also going to do a hygiene kit kind of thing that we assemble for communities and schools, and then they end up using it in the school system. So we're going to be doing that at minimum, and then look at other ways to partner long term. So thank you so much for just spending a little bit of time and talking to us here all about it. Appreciate it.
Thank you for
Let's
having me.
give her a hand. Yeah. Thanks. So 14 years ago, a software engineer named Laszlo Henyets decided to dabble in this online currency that was becoming the thing in the internet world, and it was called cryptocurrency, and he managed to get his digital hands on something known as Bitcoin. And he thought that was really cool, but he was curious, like, what value does this actually have in the real world? So he decided to do an experiment with his Bitcoin, and he went into an online forum and he said, I will pay. This was on May 18th of 2010. He got online and he said, I will pay someone 10,000 Bitcoin if they will give me 2 pizzas and deliver pizza. He wanted to see, could I trade this cryptocurrency for real goods? And someone took him up on the offer. He transferred 10,000 Bitcoin to this guy, and he received 2 large pizzas from Papa John's with the works. Now, that story kind of was buried for a long time until about 5 years ago. 60 Minutes decided to look into it, and they actually ran a story about all that what had happened there. And one of the things they pointed out was that the value of the Bitcoin that guy had offloaded for pizza at the time, as recently as maybe a year or so ago, the value of that Bitcoin was $266 million. That's how much Laszlo paid for his 2 pizzas, which... Okay, they did have the works on them, so I'm sure they were very good. But it's pretty wild, right? And they asked this guy, they did this interview on 60 Minutes, and they're like, what, sort of like, what were you thinking? You got rid of all this Bitcoin and all that. And he said something really interesting I want to put up on the screen. His response was this: well, with the info I had at the time, it seemed like a great idea. Now, it pains us a little bit to hear a story like that. It pains us to hear when people are sitting on a gold mine of resources and they don't use them well because they just don't exactly know what they have. It pains us when we think, man, you have almost unlimited resources, it's almost infinite, and you're totally wasting them. I think when it comes to things like money, which is what we've been talking about in this series, there's few things more tragic than seeing someone squander what they have on something that doesn't really matter. When part of that's a squandering issue, but it's just textbook money mismanagement. When you see that happen, it's hard to watch because, man, you got to appreciate what you have. You got to know what you have. And the truth is, I think, we are not all that different than Laszlo, really, at the end of the day. And this is me included. We are sitting on a lot of resources as individuals, as families, as a church, and a lot of times we don't really know what we have. If you consider the statistics on this, the average Richmonder, if you have a full-time job, this puts you in, of income earners in the world, you're in the top 1% of the world, not of America, but of the world, right? If you have a full-time job. So you have financial resources. Here's some crazy stats on American living and money. Number 1, the average home in America has 300,000 items in it. It's a lot of stuff. Number 2, we consume twice as much material goods as we did 50 years ago. Twice as much. 3, the average home is 3 times bigger than 50 years ago, even though family sizes are smaller. And in those homes, we have 2-car garages. However, number 4, only 25% of people can put both cars in it because only 33% can put 1 car in it because they use it for storage. So we have so much stuff. We have these 2-car garages, and we can't even put 2 cars in it because we're using that for storage. And then you can go into the whole thing about the storage industry and people buying places to store extra things. There's like an old George Carlin routine on this. We just have a lot of stuff, guys. We have a lot of things that we have accumulated. We may not have 10,000 Bitcoin, but we have a lot, and we don't know what to do with it. And what we do have, we often think, well, I just don't quite have enough. In fact, a survey was done years ago. I've told you about it before. But when they asked people of various incomes, how much money do you need to get by? Like, what would be the right amount of money for you to have? Regardless of the income level, the answer was always the same. It was always 20% more. So very wealthy people said, if I just had a number that was 20% more, then I'd be good. And less wealthy people, if I just had 20% more, I'd be good. Poorer people, if I just had 20% more, I'd be good. This was the consistent answer. So the problem isn't about the number we have. There's a problem that we have with how we manage or maybe mismanage our money. And we need to think through that. We think that, okay, I'm going to handle my money, and if I just have this amount, then I'm going to be good. And then I will be, whatever good means, I'm going to be happy, I will be complete. Financial planner guru guy Dave Ramsey says, money doesn't change you, it just makes you more of what you already are. So if you're an anxious person, you get more money, you're going to be more anxious because you're going to be worried about that money going away. If you are a selfish person, money will just make you more selfish. If you are a grateful, generous person, then money is going to make you more grateful and more generous. And that's actually, sort of statistically been proven true, but we think it's not true. We think that the more money we have, the more generous we'll be. I'd give more money away, but I don't make enough. When I make a little more, then I'm going to start really being generous with my money. They did a study at Boston College a few years back, and they actually found out that when salaries go up, for the average American, when salaries go up, their generosity goes down, percentage-wise. They actually start giving away less money as they make more money. And that's weird. They actually found that people in a lower or middle income bracket give away percentage-wise more money than people in higher income brackets. That's pretty sad, right? And I think the whole Laszlo story about offloading 10,000 Bitcoin for pizza is sad, but I think what's more tragic than that is that as a society, and I would even argue especially in the church, we have the means and the possibility and the capability to make a radical impact on the world. We can actually move the needle in certain areas and change things. But instead, we buy more stuff and don't manage the money well that we have, and we don't end up making the impact that we could. So we're going to wrap up this series today called Outta Pocket. In week 1, we talked about how we view money and said, hey, we are stewards of God's money. All of it belongs to Him. We manage His money on His behalf, in a sense. And then last week, we talked about different ways that you can use money. We talked about saving, investing. And I want to build off of where we ended last week when we talked about giving money away and generosity. I want to build off that. And my prayer for this whole thing is this is a very practical topic. I hope and pray that this is useful to you. That when you walk out of here, if you're a believer in Jesus, you go, okay, this is challenging me in these ways to align my financial with my spiritual, that kind of thing. But even if you don't believe in God and you're not sure where you're at with faith and all that, I hope if you're a person who's like, I want money to matter and I want to use it to make impact, I hope what I'm telling you today will be useful to you and you'll go, okay, this is a way I can use money to make a difference with it. If you have money and you want to make a difference with it, this will be for you. If you're on the struggle bus financially, Topher mentioned we have a financial class coming up that would help with that. But I hope that this is helpful for you also. It gives you a vision of where you can go financially. So today, I want to give you an invitation to a new financial future. And to do it, I want to look at this story from Luke chapter 21. This is an interesting interaction that Jesus has with his disciples where it's a weird thing. Jesus and his disciples are watching other people donate money, okay? Which to us, we're like, that's odd, because we do everything sort of digitally or whatever. But in that culture, it was a bit different. And they're watching people give money at the temple, and this woman ends up putting some money in. And I want to read it to you. Luke 21, it says this. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for they all contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. Okay, it's a really weird story for us, because we don't give this way. But apparently in that culture, people would give, and currency is not, paper, it's coins, right? So they would give coins, and there would be these collection areas in the temple, synagogue. There'd be a collection area that's like this bronze receptacle, and you'd go put your money in it. And when you put a coin into a bronze receptacle like that, it's going to make noise. So you hear it cling as it goes in there. And if you put a lot of money in there, you're like splashing the pot. It's going to be loud. People are going to notice. And so it would become a thing where people would kind of watch and listen to how much people would give. They would observe, oh man, that person put in a bunch of money. Man, did you hear that? Bam, like all the coins started rattling around there when they put that money in. It was a big deal. And so you'd have rich people that would roll up in their like G-Wagon Camels and their Gucci shoes, their Gucci sandals. They'd roll in and they'd be like, yeah, and they'd throw this big bag of money in and it'd splash all around. And that was very impressive. But the problem with it is you took what should have been something about submission to God or obedience to God, and they've now made it a spectator sport. It's now about being impressive for other people when they give. And that was an issue. And Jesus is observing this. He's watching rich people give. And he sees this woman come in, and she gives, it says what she had to live on. So she gives 2 coins, but it's different when she gives money. It's different. And it's very challenging to the people hearing it when Jesus is like, no, what she gave is impressive, because Jesus is looking at faithfulness, not just the sheer amount of money. And Jesus actually says she gave more. And look, if people are dropping large amounts of coins in this offering and she gives 2 coins, the disciples would have been like, clearly she did not give more. She gave 2 little coins. But that's not the way Jesus sees it. He goes, no. They're giving out of the abundance. They've got plenty. They're just throwing a little bit in. This woman is really stepping up and giving in a powerful way. She's demonstrating faithfulness in her giving in a way that these other people are not. So I think there's a couple ideas that come out of this. Number one, I think heaven hears things differently. Heaven hears things differently. Coins go in the container, and everybody's impressed of how loud they were. She puts 2 coins in, and Jesus is impressed at her faith. He goes, this is a woman of faith. This is a woman of commitment, and she's doing something differently, and there's a different economy at work here. So number one, heaven hears things differently. Number 2, giving is about your faith, not about the sum of money. We get very distracted when you hear about people giving large amounts of money. Oh, this person, this celebrity donated $1 million to this cause, or they give $100,000 to this. We're like, whoa, that's a lot of money, and it sounds like impressive. And, it is impressive in some ways. I remember hearing years ago about Stephen King, and this was back when $1 million was the biggest gift I'd ever heard of probably, but Stephen King donated $1 million to help this library happen in Maine, and you're like, oh, it's a book guy. He's giving $1 million helping this library. Like, that's super cool. What a generous donation. Except that he had a lot more money than that, so it's not for him, it might be just a drop in the bucket, right, to give $1 million. So it was a little bit different. So we get distracted by how many zeros are on the check, and we miss that, no, there's ways to give that aren't about the zeros, but there's ways to give that are just demonstrating faithfulness. The call of Jesus is not for us to all give away the same amount of money, but for all of us to be sacrificial and to give generously and give even if it hurts a little bit. We have different capacities for giving, but we are all called to faith, and we're all called to generosity. And he honors this woman because of her faith, not because of the amount that she gave as a dollar amount. So number 2, giving is about your faith and not about the sum of money. And number 3, giving is a way to grow in our generosity. The culture of the day, the custom going back to the Old Testament, was to tithe. To tithe means a tenth. It's to give 10% of all your grain and all your sort of resources. You give a 10% of that to the temple, to what they would have considered like their church, their gathering. You give a 10% to that, and then there would be some offerings over and above that. This goes all the way back to Deuteronomy 14. We looked at it last week, that God calls his people to do this. And what's interesting is when you read it, it wasn't just a financial thing. It was this is going to be a thing that you do to build trust and dependency on God. So it was about the relationship with God, not just about money. So as people would give, the idea was as you would give away 10% of your income, you grow in the community's capacity to serve, but we also grow in your own capacity to be generous and in your own heart. So that was kind of the idea, that people would would do that. And this woman gives way more than 10%. She's not just giving a tithe, she's giving, it says, what she had to live on. So it's more than 10%, and you see that also in the New Testament. Other examples of people giving not a flat 10%, but they're giving even more than that. They're selling property and possessions, and they're taking the money that they got from selling those things, they're giving to the apostles to distribute to everyone in the church. You saw that kind of thing happen in the New Testament, and it's a powerful thing. People are getting creative, and they're being radically generous. And that radical generosity of the early church got noticed. It was noticed by the Roman culture that Christian people were generous with their time, their money, their energy. In fact, in a letter from Aristides to Emperor Hadrian, it says this is an ancient letter. It says that the Christians love one another, and he who has gives to him who has not without boasting. And when they see a stranger, they take him to their homes and rejoice over him as a very brother. Do you have another slide there or no? Yeah. And if there is among them any that is poor and needy, and if they have no spare food, they fast 2 or 3 days in order to supply to the needy to their lack of food. Such, O king, is their manner of life. This is a new people, and there is something divine in the midst of them. This is secular sources talking about what they're seeing in the Christians. They're going, man, when they don't even have enough, they will fast, they will skip meals, and they will give that food, or they will take money. Other sources point that the money that they save from not buying food, they give to help someone in need. This is radical generosity on behalf of the early Christians, and that kind of thing moved the needle in the Roman Empire and changed things. Man, when I die, I hope that people say I'm generous like that. You know, they're going to gather at a funeral, and people are going to say stuff, and to be fair, honest, I won't be there, not really. So whatever they say, they say. But what I would hope that they would say at my funeral is they would say, Chris was generous with his time, with his energy, with all the resources that he had, with his money. That Chris was a generous person. I would hope they would say this. And my guess is you hope that too. You'd like to be thought of as generous, but not even to be thought of as generous, you'd like to be a generous person, right? I think that's true about you too. So for me, I tithe to this church. I give away it's about 11% of our income to Area 10 every month. And I don't do it because the church needs it. Now, the church, like any nonprofit, has financial obligations, and we pay rent here, and we have a mortgage, and all the things, and staff, and all the things that a church will have as sort of upkeep of any organization. But that's not why I tithe. I tithe, and the people that I know who tithe, who say, I'm going to take 10% of my offer of my income and give it to God through the church. People I know that do that, they don't do it because the church needs it. They do it to be obedient to God and to grow their own faith and to grow their own generosity. They do it because, man, this is what God is calling me to do, is to be obedient here and give away a portion of what He will, of what He has given for me. And I've seen that over and over in this church. People want to grow in their capacity to be generous. They give more money away. Now, I think the tithe, in that sense, giving away 10%, is to the local church and not to other organizations, the United Way or Crisis Pregnancy or all that. Those are all good things. Those are all good things to give to. And I think if we can, as God blesses us, to give over and above that 10% that we can give to some of those things, I think that's an awesome thing. But I think tithing, then, is giving back to God through the local church, and it's a powerful thing. Now, here we are, beginning of August. I know I'm not stupid. I know this is not the subject you got out of bed for this morning. You weren't like, I hope he talks about giving 10% to a church when I get there. This is gonna be great. For some of you, this is about as comfortable for you as when the barista turns the iPad around. And it's like, hey, so, just going to answer a few questions. Like, there's one question, and I know what it is. I actually saw, I don't know if it was a comedian or some sort of commentator. He's like, man, the tipping has gotten out of control in this country. Like, what's going on? Right? It's gotten kind of weird, right? And he's like, I propose a new rule. If I have to order the food standing up, I'm not tipping. I'm like, oh, I like this. I could get into this. I could get into this rule. Some of you are like, I work behind that counter, man. Stop it. I'll stop. I I have worked behind that counter too, so I get it, but it's gotten weird. Anyway, I understand that when a pastor on a stage talks about tithing to a local church, I get how self-serving that sounds to you. You're like, yeah, of course you would say that. So let's not have me say it. Let me give you a little bit of data on this. There's an organization called the Pew Research Center. This is a data-driven organization. It is government-funded. They have no incentive to make the church look good in their data. And they've done a pretty massive study in the last couple of years. And they've done a study about churches and charity. And the question they're trying to answer is, can we do good without God? Do we need Christian people? Do we need churches in order to do good things in society? So they dove into it, and here's some of the data that they came up with. First question is religion the problem or the solution? 51% of the people that responded said religion was the problem. Religion's the problem. So that's not good, right? Second question, we'll put it up on the screen. They asked this. Do you think all the good in the world could still be done without God? So if we were all not religious. 57% said, yes, the good will still get done without God. This is not a good look for the church, right? When over half the people are like, we'll do good stuff, we don't need the church at all. It's not necessary. But then they got into the actual numbers of what is getting done and how it's getting done in the world. And let me show you the numbers. When it came to volunteering, of those who attend a church weekly and pray daily, 45% had done volunteer in the last 7 days, volunteer work, whereas only 7% of those who don't did any volunteer work. Of those who are active in church, 65% had given to the poor, 25% more than the average person. Those with some religious affiliation gave double the national average to charity. Those who attended church weekly gave 4 times the national average to church weekly. Not only that, they even outgave people on non-religious causes. Practicing Christians adopt children at 2.5 times the national rate, including foster care. And nearly 60% of all beds for the homeless come from Christian organizations. Let me just read you the rest of this. The Philanthropy Roundtable went on to publish. Listen to this, because this is rapid fire. Okay, hold on. We'll get to that slide in just a second. Hold on. They went on to publish that Christian Americans and churches provide most of the day-to-day help that resettles refugees and asylum seekers arriving in the U.S. The bulk of volunteers mentoring prisoners and their families, both while they are incarcerated and after they are released, are Christians eager to welcome offenders back into society and help them succeed. Local congregations provide 130,000 alcohol recovery programs, 120,000 programs that assist the unemployed, 26,000 programs over the years to help people living with HIV/AIDS, and that's one ministry for every 46 people infected with HIV/AIDS. Lastly, they said, put this on the screen, Christian philanthropy accounted for 70% of all American charity in 2022, which was $300 billion in total, and that Christians outgave the U.S. government in addressing global poverty. So, I always think of stuff like this when you hear all this talk and hand-wringing in social media when people are like, evangelicals, the church, Christian nationalism, and people get bent out of shape about all of these things. And I'm not saying there's no problems there. I'm not saying there's nothing ever to address. There's scandals, there's abuse, there's problems in churches. Sin wreaks havoc, and that includes on people in churches and leaders in churches. I get that. But when you look at the data of what is getting done out there in the world, the truth is Christians are getting it done. And I know this even anecdotally. A couple of years ago, when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, there was a large resettlement of Afghan refugees into the U.S. and some into Richmond. And I sat in a meeting where different organizations like the IRC and Commonwealth Catholic Charities and different groups like that were trying to figure out how to get these refugees resettled and get them the services they need to assimilate into the U.S. society. And I sat in a meeting at Mekong Restaurant on Broad Street with about 30 people, and all of these people were church people. They were all from various churches, and it was a sort of a think tank meeting of what are we going to do with all the refugees coming in, how are we going to help? And different churches were talking about ways that they are coming around as a church, different families, and trying to help them get to appointments that they need, get their English language learning, help them navigate the system of schools and all that kind of stuff. And I sat in that room and I was like, this is really cool that Christians and churches are stepping into this and trying to get it done. They're not the only people getting it done, but they are the large bulk of people getting it done in culture. And I think it's pretty fantastic to see when that happens. So I believe that local churches are making a huge impact on the world in all sorts of sectors of society that we don't even see. Even the stuff we talk about where we're like, this is oppression, this is an injustice. Even the language we have for injustice as a society, we originally basically got from Christianity. God was about the poor and oppressed and the marginalized long before we ever started talking about it in social science textbooks. Writer, this has come out fairly recently, there's a secular writer historian named Tom Holland, not Spider-Man, a different guy. This is what he said. The idea that human beings have rights, that they are born equally, that they are owed sustenance and shelter and refugee from persecution, these were never self-evident truths prior to Christianity. So all those things we go, but people deserve a basic, yes, they do. It's just that that's not how the world thought before Christianity came along. Christianity changed the culture and continues to change the culture. God's heart for the overlooked, the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized, these things have been etched into God's word long before it ever became popular on social media, and long before you and I ever took a breath. I guess we could say it this way. God has been about justice long before it was ever trending. And so, because of that, when you give to a church, you enable the church to be the church. You enable the church to reach people. You enable the church to help people. You enable the church to build people into the wholeness that comes from being a disciple of Jesus and knowing God through him. And when people become disciples of Jesus, that ends up rewriting almost every social dysfunction that we have in our world. Right now, the church is helping people face loneliness. We're going to talk about that in the next series. That is a huge, you talk about the epidemic of loneliness. That is a huge issue in culture, and a lot of you probably in this room, you're feeling it. You're feeling maybe some disconnection. That's a huge issue in culture, and there's a lot of downstream effects of that disconnection. The church is stepping in to address that. The church is stepping into adoption and foster care in a huge way. These are things that we are involved in, getting involved with communities in schools, getting involved with food scarcity and some of these issues around our culture. This is powerful stuff that goes on in the world. At the end of the day, here's why I think we give to God through the local church. It's this: the church does not just do good in the world is good because the church is in it. I talked about this last week. Giving has the power to change us. It does something in our hearts. It's the antidote to greed. It can actually change us. It moves us from greed to generosity. It stirs our faith and enables us to serve people. And so that's why I put a challenge in front of you last week. I'll put it in front of you again today. Here's the challenge. We're calling it the 25 by 25 challenge. Here's the thing. If you love Jesus and you love this church and you don't tithe, you don't give 10% of your income away, commit to tithing for the next 25 weeks. That'll take you up into the new year, into mid-January. For 25 weeks, just say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure out 10% of my income and give away 10% to the local church. Try that for 25 weeks. If you love Jesus, you love this church, but your finances are a hot mess, commit to giving some percentage. Say, I'm going to give 3% of my money away. Something intentional, sacrificial. I'll give 3%, 4%. I'll do something to give money away. And that's going to feel risky. And we talk all the time in church about how God looks for faithfulness and we need to be people of faith. Faith, intellectually, we know what it is, but faith, what it feels like is risk. So this may feel risky to you. That's okay. That's what faith feels like. So if your finances are a mess, commit to giving some percentage for the next 25 weeks. And then finally, there's one more. Hold on, can you back up? Yeah, one more. If you're not sold on Jesus yet, you're like, I don't know if I know this God thing. Just try this. Just give $25 a week for 25 weeks. And let's just see what happens. Let's see what changes in your life. Let's see what changes in your heart. Let's see what can be done, what stirs in your faith if you do that. Just take that challenge. We have a website. You can go area10church.com/give. There's ways there to give recurring or whatever. You can go there and do that. And I wanted you to think about that and take that challenge. And I want to take you back to where we started today. Remember what Laszlo's response is to the question when they said, why did you spend 10,000 Bitcoin on pizza? And you didn't realize what you had and what that was worth. And if you remember his response, he said this, with the information I had at the time, it just made sense. And so here's my question to all of us. With the information you now have about the good we can do with money pooled together as a church, what makes sense? When we use money to fuel the mission of God, incredible things happen. And honestly, when we use money in church and you use to fuel the mission of God here on earth, we get questions. Wait, why would you do that? And is that the right way to do this? Is that exactly the best way to do it? But the truth is, serving others, addressing mental illness, creating a space of belonging for people, caring for widows and orphans, combating sin and death, and trying to help people head towards eternal life, that is actually what makes sense when you consider what God has equipped us with financially. Everything flows downstream from that, I believe, that when you give through the church, you equip and you enable people to meet Jesus and become like Jesus so that the world is turned upside down by the grace of God. There's a writer I really like. I've enjoyed his stuff over the years, named Andy Crouch, and listen to what he says this very cleanly, simply. He says, to become a radical culture in this country is quite easy. Just give 10% of your money and turn the television off. It's pretty simple. Be generous and maybe limit your access to the noise. And it's radical and it's powerful. So with the information that you now have, how will you live differently? Will we open ourselves to a greater faith, even though it's hard? So will we open ourselves to greater faith through generous giving so that despair can be defeated and healing can happen? And so heaven will look different because God can do so much with our so little. I pray that's a step for us because great things are ahead in the kingdom of God for you, for me, for us as a church, for the city, for our culture. I believe God's going to do great work here through generous, faithful people. Let's pray. God, I pray that this message stirs something inside us. It may be challenging. It may be the kind of thing where we have to go back and think and pray and look at our own hearts and go, okay, this widow gave this percentage. Where am I at with that? What can I do to give generously? How can I be about that? And I pray that you help us to do that work, that we get honest and real about how we spend our money, why we spend our money, how we think about ownership of our money. God, it's challenging stuff. This stuff can feel out of pocket. It can feel, oh man, should we talk about that? Should we say that out loud? But this is real stuff. This is rubber hits the road kind of stuff for our faith. And so, God, I pray everyone walks out of here today with, if not a plan, the beginnings of a plan to be generous, faithful people. God, I thank you so much for this community. I am amazed I'm humbled. I'm consistently blown away by what you have done in and through this church for almost 16 years now. But God, I pray that the best years are ahead of us, that there's more we can do and will do together to introduce people to you. God, you do your work of drawing people to you and move in our hearts to be the faithful people who will support all of what's happening here. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.